Namaskar and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you details of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And for more in this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you. Beginning with, we have with us Alexandra Zubenko. She's joining us from Moscow. She's a research fellow at PIR Center in Moscow there. Welcome, Alexandra. We are also joined by Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador, and Professor Swan Singh is also joining us, the chairperson of Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament at JNU. Welcome to you as well, Professor Singh. And let me begin right away with you, Professor Swan Singh. Let's first start by understanding the genesis of this conflict, or the reasons behind this current conflict, a bit deeper into it. I just gave the the recent information, but what is exactly behind this ongoing tension between Russia and Ukraine? Almost a decade now, but the tensions are again going up the curve.
Thank you, Vishal, for asking this question, because the baggage which is defining as to how each side is so reticent or paranoid, either way you want to look at it, needs to be underlined. So this, in a very quick fashion, could be seen as a story of about at least 3 decades of NATO's expansion eastwards after collapse of Soviet Union, where it has moved as much as about 600 miles east. And what is interesting is that about 3 former Soviet republics, which are Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and 4 other Warsaw Pact members, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia, have joined NATO. So one can understand the fear and concern that Russia has had of this constant forward eastward movement of NATO. And now the recent engagement with Ukraine. Ukraine, as you understand, is already building 2 naval bases under a defense deal with the United Kingdom. It is receiving advanced technologies like drones from NATO member Turkey. In fact, on 6th of December only, President Zelensky announced that they are going to go forward and have a co-production of these combat drones. So it's a constant, sort of penetration, as Russians would like to call, of NATO into Ukraine, which is making President Zelensky increasingly reluctant to even implement the agreement of 2015, which is called Minsk II agreement, where President had agreed to speak to the 2 so-called republics in eastern Ukraine, which are Russian-dominated. So it's a very complex web of ongoing sort of tensions, where Russia has put in very quickly, let me say, 3 fundamental red lines today, which means that there is no question of Ukraine joining NATO. There is no question of NATO forces or bases being established in Ukraine. And third one is there is no forward new deployments of dangerous technologies on Russian border. So it's the baggage, as I would like to call it, which is really making it difficult. But Russia has clarified they don't want a war, despite prepondering advantage that they have over Ukraine from 3 sides. They fundamentally, as you opened the program, want an international agreement that NATO will not be moving any further forward east.
Professor Singh, looking at the geo-economic aspect, something which Ambassador Trigunayat mentioned, that also seemed to be one of the major reasons for these heightened tensions in this part of the world. Obviously, for Russia, security is a big issue. For Ukraine, it's the territorial integrity. West would, or NATO would always want to go a bit deeper into this territory, to the extent possible. But energy security and the energy resources also play a major part here, something which perhaps also might lead to some of the European nations, not speaking in a singular united tone.
Exactly. I think that is an important point we need to underline. Other than defense exports, it's the energy export that has been the foreign exchange earner as far as Russia is concerned. And other than China that buys an enormous amount of energy from Russia, European nations, if you remember, actually in early 1990s, quite in defiance of United States, they had moved forward in building that network of energy pipelines. And the latest one, as Ambassador just mentioned, the Nord Stream 2 is something which is a major project. And therefore, I think one has to underline the interdependence on both sides. Though there are insinuations, especially from Berlin, that they hold this unusual card of blocking this Nord Stream 2. But European countries would also be dependent. In fact, that is the reason why President Putin is repeatedly saying that he doesn't want to singularly negotiate with President Joe Biden, but would like to see some of the European members of NATO also sit on that table where these guarantees are given. And I agree with Alexandra saying, Russia has repeatedly said such promises were made to Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev was promised that not an inch of further eastward expansion of NATO would happen. But because that never came in writing in an international agreement, therefore today Putin doesn't want to limit the negotiations only to United States, whereas United States sees it as if it's a bilateral negotiation and they are going to almost arbitrate in that situation, which is not how the reality is. And that, I think, energy connect of Europe, particularly East European countries, which are also today part of NATO, are also very, very conscious of how these negotiations will go forward.
Okay.
They are indeed very reluctant. They want to go very incrementally on these issues. So definitely the economic connect, and particularly my last point in just 10 seconds.
Please carry on, Professor Singh.
Post-pandemic, you see all these countries have been hard hit by deceleration of economic growth, and they're all desperately looking at resilience in economic growth. And in any situation, the kind of economic models that the world today follows, energy is the main driver of any economic resilience. And Russia holds that key in that sense. So one has to appreciate the complex relationship, economic relationship, that Russia over time has tried to build with European nations. And I think that will also account as to how far they will really be able to accommodate Russia. Russia, as we understand, has very friendly Belarus on the north, Crimea on the south. Russia today has about almost 1 million strong armed forces compared to only 200,000 of Ukraine. So in that sense, also sustainability of just forward deployment, if not war, just to tire out each other. Russia stands a clear advantage. And in that sense, it has certain strengths of its own. And therefore, I think somewhere they'll have to find whether reassurances, whether certain concessions will work in this case of Russia relenting on this forward deployment. But I think all various contours of very complex relationship that Russia has built over time with Europe is interesting way to look at it. It's not just simply East-West Warsaw Pact versus NATO relationship that used to be in Cold War years. It's a very different relationship today.
Indeed. Now there are various added, angles to this particular complex issue. They are, brewing up tensions between both the nations, Ukraine and Russia, there as well. Professor Singh, from your viewpoint, looking at it from a holistic perspective in terms of the solutions, the probable solutions to this crisis. Of course, Russia is, asking for Ukraine to, abide by the Minsk agreement and come back to it, something which the other stakeholders might also be amenable to.
First of all, Ukraine has enormous challenges within. For example, President Putin, as Ambassador was saying, had advised President Zelensky to implement Minsk II. But apparently, he's not able to do that if he wants to be re-elected. There's a whole strong nationalist forces inside. They want to build a unitary Ukraine, which was originally, when it came out of Soviet Union, it was a patchwork of various territories. And we have seen these territories in one part of East, which is declaring itself autonomous. But let me underline, if you see history of international relations, despite being the second most powerful country, as you mentioned in the opening, it can be made a scapegoat to relationship between Russia and United States. Despite the fact that both European Union foreign ministers meeting in Brussels and Liverpool meeting of G7 have come out with very aggressive stances against Russia, saying severe sanctions, quote unquote, other means, etc. But fundamentally, relationship will be decided. What happens to Ukraine will be decided between what happens between the United States and Russia. And let me underline, United States' fundamental headache today or challenge today is not Russia, it's China.
Okay.
And therefore, Joe Biden will not like to push Russia beyond a point where it sort of goes all the way into the fold of Chinese and starts kowtowing exactly the Chinese line over a period of time. So United States has its own limitations in how far it can push Russia. European states have their own engagement with Russia also. In Ukraine, President Zelensky has its own limitations of seeking re-election.
Okay.
So I think it's going to continuously grow piecemeal, and I think it will kind of drift gradually in terms of minimal concessions on both sides. And I don't see any either fundamental written guarantees being given from NATO side to Russia that they will not move an inch beyond what they have moved now. Those incremental returns will continue over a period of time, but they will over time, I think, find a way of marginalizing some of these tensions.
Okay. So there are a lot of complexities involved, both domestically and internationally, from geopolitical as well as geoeconomic perspective. Thank you so much, Professor Swan Singh.